You freed us from the tyranny of a madman, only to deliver us into the hands of a stuttering idiot? We'd become the laughingstock of the whole world if we accept this dummy as emperor.
My lords, I respect the constitutional rights of this noble house and would only accept the acclamation of the army if this noble house elects me
Emperor.
My Lord Sentius, I did not know you could also stutter. I thought your talents were confined to neighing like a horse. Is there anyone else who wishes to call attention to my misfortunes? Or shall I call attention to yours? Sentius, get up. Not only are you a pompous ass and a hypocrite, but you have acquired your position through bribery. Asiaticus, stand up. Not only are you a profiteer, but since we're dealing in personalities, you're a stuffed and puffed up glutton. You'd sell your soul for the tail end of an anchovy. I, Claudius, will tell you how to frame your laws. Profiteering and bribery will stop. The Senate will function only in the name of Roman justice. And all of you who have acquired position dishonestly will be replaced by men who love Rome.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today at the Study of Antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I am your host, Nick Barksdale, and today is episode 1 of a very long series that will encompass the reign of every Roman emperor listed from the east to the west. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And today we are joined by Dr. Traver, who's going to take us into my personal favorite, which is going to be Emperor Claudius. Dr. Traver, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I am professor of ancient and medieval history at Southeastern Louisiana University, and I teach the ancient and medieval courses. And so today I'd like to talk about the Emperor Claudius to start off the series. And one of the first things I want to do is talk about the primary sources, because as historians, we're always interested in primary sources. And of course, there are a variety of primary sources, but in order to write a secondary source, of course, you need primary sources. So there are the literary ones, there are the epigraphic ones, and there's the numismatic ones, coins as well. But generally for the study of the reign of the Emperor Claudius, there are 3 main sources to which historians traditionally turn. The first, and they're primary in a loose sense, because there were several histories that were written right around Claudius's reign. Unfortunately, they don't survive. However, they were used by later historians. So really, the earliest chronicle we have is by the biographer Tacitus. And Tacitus is writing about 50 years after the death of Claudius. And as I said, he uses sources which no longer survive. He's a senator, and he writes his annals about, they begin with the death of Augustus, so with the ascension of Tiberius, and then to the death of Nero, so roughly 14 to 68. The problem with the annals is that the manuscript in which they were found was missing a quire. And so the text as we have it today jumps from the death of Tiberius, skips over the entire reign of Gaius Caligula, and it doesn't contain the first 7 years of the reign of Claudius. So for the first 7 years, Tacitus really isn't the source, unless later in his work he might refer back to something. There also is Tacitus' Agricola, which is a paean to his father-in-law, but it mentions Britain and Claudius's invasion of Britain, so that's also a source. The second main source that to which historians turn is Sotonius, and this is Sotonius' 12 Caesars, and whereas Tacitus writes in a very chronological perspective. Sotonius doesn't. His biographies of the first 12 emperors, but they tend to be rather written than writing in a chronological perspective. He's really sensationalist, and so he's gossipy and palace-centered, and so he'll talk about their lineage and their personal appearance and maybe what they accomplished, but it tends to be scandalous. It has the quality of a tabloid, and so Sotonius, however, would have had access to all kinds of important sources. He was an imperial assistant both under the emperors Trajan and Hadrian. And in fact, he was dismissed by Hadrian, and we think he wrote his portion on Claudius after he was dismissed, but it nevertheless contains snippets of primary sources. As an example, Augustus and Livia will often write little notes back and forth to each other, and some of these are contained in Sotonius' section in Claudius. So Sotonius had access to imperial archives. Tacitus, too, as a senator, would have had access to the senatorial archives. So they all had access to these great sources which no longer survive. In fact, Claudius wrote an autobiography, and Sotonius uses it as a source. So unfortunately, it doesn't survive today, the autobiography. The third main source to which historians turn is Cassius Dio's Roman history. And this was written about 150 years after Claudius. Now, Dio is a senator and a consul, so he's going to, present a senatorial perspective as well. It's not clear if he had access to Tacitus, but he had access to some of the same sources that Tacitus used. And for the early events of Claudius's reign, we are almost completely dependent on Cassius Dio because he has the events about the Ascension and the invasion of Britain. So that's traditionally the source to which you turn. Now, there's problems with all of these sources. For Cassius Dio, he doesn't survive a complete text. In fact, there's epitomes or abridgments of much of Dio where it's constructed by others much later. Now, books 60 and 61 concern Claudius, and 60 is complete. Most of 61 is complete. But as it gets into the later years of Claudius and the early years of Nero, we have to rely on epitomes. But for the early part of Claudius's life, it's a very good source. Now, of course, there are other sources, literary sources. Josephus, for example, discusses Claudius in the Jewish Antiquities and Jewish Revolt. Particularly, he's interested in the accession of Claudius when he becomes emperor because he wants to highlight the role that Herod Agrippa played. We also have Pliny the Elder, who mentions Claudius on several occasions, so we can use him as a source. We have Seneca, who wrote The Gordification of Claudius, and Seneca is a hostile witness, so we can use him as a source, but universally, Claudius had him expelled from Rome, so he's not very favorable. And then we have later authors. Eutropius is a 4th century author, and we have snippets about the invasion of Britain in there too. So these are some of the sources that we use. But generally, the main three, Tacitus, Sotonius, Cassius Dio, well, what they're presenting is a very senatorial and equestrian perspective on the reign of Claudius. And as we'll see, Claudius is going to have a strained relationship with the Senate, and this is going to be reflected in all the primary sources. So unfortunately, what we get in Sotonius is that Claudius becomes kind of a babbling buffoon who's really not capable of coming up with anything on his own, that everything he does was the product of either his circle of freedmen or maybe his wives. What Tacitus does is he depicts Claudius as kind of a pawn in the power politics of the palace. And so there's a lot going on, and Claudius is used in lots of different ways. So he's, in an odd kind of way, he's ruled by the people whom he himself is supposed to rule. So, it's not a favorable depiction. And we get a similar personification in Cassius Dio, whereas Claudius is, simply kind of adrift, controlled by all of those other people around him. And unfortunately, really until the 20th century, that was kind of the standard depiction of Claudius as kind of a, this buffoon, this useless man, when in fact, in the 20th and 21st century, there's been a radical reappraisal of the reign of Claudius, and it generally is seen as a very positive reign in which lots of favorable things happen for Rome, especially in comparison to Tiberius, Gaius, Caligula, and then especially Nero. So Claudius will be a bright light rather than a very kind of comical period in which we get from Sotonius and Tacitus and Cassius Dio.